Hey Josh, good morning.
Hey Toddy, how are you?
Doing good. Hey Jason, morning.
Hey,
I'll be fly on the wall as usual. Hey Brandon.
Split across coasts. I think
do we think we have quorum to start talking about stuff?
sure.
All right. I have a fun one, and I mean it in the not sarcastic way. Talking to a couple of folks, John and Josh and Matt on our side, we were talking about the usefulness of being able for a registry to communicate non-blocking warnings. Basically, like OCI should not specify what these warnings are, but example warnings that a registry might want to tell a client is this image is deprecated. This image will change its behavior soon. Your token is about to expire. Today is Tuesday and the weather is nice. Whatever we want to say. We can't put this obviously in the body of the response, but we can put these in headers. And I learned last week that there is well, it was a real roller coaster. There is an official HTTP warning header. Please use registry.kits instead of the other thing. Yeah, exactly. That would be an excellent thing to stuff into a warning. There is an official HTTP warning header. It was deprecated at some point in the past, but Kubernetes still uses it. Recently, over the last 2 years, added the ability to specify warnings coming back from the API server. So even though it's officially deprecated, I think we should follow Kubernetes's precedent and do what they do with basically exactly the semantics and restrictions that they put in place, so that registries can specify these or can communicate these things out of band of the body. Clients should, I think we can talk about wording, but clients should bubble these up to users in some way that is non-obtrusive and sort of leave it at that. I think it's a relatively small diff if we can all agree on the wording. And Brandon, thank you. You had a couple of really good comments about like what do we do when there's too many of these, or what do we do when there's a bunch of requests and they all say the same thing? That I think is a lot of things will be the same as Kubernetes, and a lot of things will be different from Kubernetes. Specifically, we don't control the main client of it, and Kubernetes says like we control kube control. We can change the behavior of that very easily. There are a lot of situations where you will hit the registry, 8 times to get a single image, and the client should not spam you with 8 identical warning messages unless it's really serious about this. So yeah, I think that was a good example and a good thing to sort of walk through. I think we can say clients should do it in an unobtrusive manner and leave it up to the client to decide what unobtrusive means to them. They can even ignore it, up to once every 10 minutes or something, like never show it more than once every 10 minutes, let alone, or regardless of how many requests get made in that 10 minutes or something. But it's sort of a nice compromise that we don't have to specify exactly what unobtrusive means. Clients can make that up, but we should say, take care not to be spammy and gross. What do folks think? I mean, I know we have the usual problem of not having maintainers enough to ratify it, but I think we have enough to at least get this PR, get a PR merged if we think this is a good idea.
What is your thought around the deprecation header that's in draft right now versus the warning header? Are we going to separate the two, or are we suggesting that we use the warning header for deprecation as well?
Good question. I think the warning header is more flexible in the good way. I don't actually know the details of the deprecation header, but I think the warning header is a an HTTP deprecation header. Okay. I will read through this and add it as reference it in the proposal. I think in general, I want to do whatever Kubernetes does. They are using the specific case they wanted to use warnings for was for deprecated APIs. You're using batch v1, beta 1, you should be using batch v1 in the next release, this will go away. So I think, there may be more semantically correct headers that we could use, but I would rather draft off of Kubernetes's decisions rather than make any new decisions myself. But I will definitely read up on this. I did not know about this, so maybe I'll learn something.
Without reading up on it myself, my knee-jerk reaction is that deprecation has a different connotation than a warning. A warning might be, hey, your password's about to expire. A deprecation might be you're using a functionality that's going to go away in the future.
I think there's also 2 kinds of deprecation in our context, which is the image you are pulling has something in it that is deprecated. Like you pulled version 001 and we would like to stop supporting that, versus the API you are calling to the registry is deprecated, or the API you are calling to the registry. You sent us something we will accept, but we would like you to send it differently next time. So I think I don't know that helps answer the question, but I think we could use warnings for both. Warnings for the image you're pulling is weird in some way, and the request you sent me is deprecated in some way.
Yeah, but in general, I think I like the idea of being able to communicate something back to the client. The intent is definitely awesome, right? And aligning with Kubernetes makes sense because the customer base is in that. So I just general goodness.
Okay, cool. I will take this general polite head nodding as signal that I should open a PR, and then we can talk specifics there. But cool, thank you.
So we've got 1029 out there as well. Next on the list here. And I'm not sure, we'd had the topic in there, guidance for registry client, respect artifacts, and I just kind of put this within that category. Is there someone else that wants to talk about it separate from 1029? Okay. That being said, if I pull up 1029, there are three distinct parts of 1029. I move some things around or share a window, and that way we're looking at the same thing and everybody can then start chatting where I can't see the chat. That's always fun. 1 second here. Okay. So a few things in this PR that I added, and two of them I think are non-confrontational. One of them is saying, hey, for the Scratch descriptor, I just changed from Scratch descriptor there to say Scratch digest and Scratch data, just to use the right terms because we got rid of that function. So I'm hoping that's pretty straightforward. I also put at the end of this, in this other file, I renamed the field. We had Scratch digest data. I'm thinking, well, it's not really a digest, it's just the data itself. So I just renamed it as Scratch data and I put a comment. So hopefully that's pretty straightforward too, between those two. So that's one change. The other change that's in here is saying, whenever you see the layers, when we're in there, I specified that we had all this verbiage in here saying, hey, you must have ownership settings in here. You must have ordered by file system starting at 0, talking about all these file system layouts and all those fields. I said, all this verbiage here doesn't apply when we're talking about an artifact. It only really applies when we're talking about an image. And so I moved all of that with the exception that you have to have at least one entry, just because I feel like there are at least some places verifying that. That's what we saw in our checks. I said only when the config media type is equal to it being an image do all those terms apply. And that's kind of nested them under there. So hopefully that's also not too confrontational and people agree that's a good thing. Before I jump forward, does that look good to other people? Yay, nay? Any concerns? Silence is golden. So the last one here that probably will cause drama, and I figured say the best for last, is that we've got a bunch of layers in there, and we've got some descriptions of places of what a Scratch digest is that we add elsewhere. And so I said, let's have the guidance for the artifact usage, just try to give people an idea of how they can use this when they start to deploy it. And so we described, okay, you've got these little double curly, that's kind of your Scratch image out there, or your Scratch data. And so I started putting some examples. And one example is saying, let me take kind of what Helm did in theirs. They had a separate config. They had a separate data. The config actually had a bunch of config stuff in there. The data had its own little tar and a bunch of other stuff in there. So that's kind of the full example of here's an artifact with pretty much everything. And then I started saying, well, we define these two Scratch, the Scratch thing. How do you use it? Where does it come into play? And one is to say, hey, if I've got some example of whatever it is, the config media type is our artifact media type, right? That's when we talk about the artifact type that we're passing up in the refers API response, that is this config media type. So we're kind of stuck with this being whatever our artifact type is. But we don't have a config. So that I think that was where we were saying we want to put this Scratch data. This is when we get into the part that people get less comfortable with, which is that this thing we're pointing to, the 441 digest in there, the double curly brackets, is no longer what this media type is. And I think that's where people get a little paranoid. And so I wanted to put that out there. And if we say, yeah, it's not the same thing, but we didn't need it to be the same thing, then great, let's go ahead and move forward with this. If it's not, let's discuss how we need to structure this thing so that people are comfortable with it. In this case, the second media type in here was the media type of whatever we had uploaded. And so it has its own digest, all its data and everything else. And I think that's kind of straightforward. And then the last example that people were asking for was how do we push something without any layers at all? And so we defined that in our fact finding that we did, and we just had the same digest in both of these like curly brackets. This media type here is whatever the media type is of your artifact type again. This one, I kept it the same as artifact type. I don't really care. We can make it an empty some kind of blank layer type if we really wanted to. I'm not too picky on that. But that is kind of what we've been trying to work through this whole time of working through it. So are people comfortable with this? Do we want to merge this, or are there concerns? I can give you a little more graphical. I was trying to throw this together really quick. If we have a Cyclone DX media type for our config, and I didn't go through and check what their actual media type is, so replace this with whatever their real media type is. But it's XML. And this is, I said 4411 is 441. I can only remember so many characters of a digest. This is my double curly, right? This again, I'm saying this is XML, is clearly not XML right here. But we need that because that's our artifact type. And so this thing here is saying, well, we're going to point to the scratch, whatever. This thing maps to artifact type, but this thing is also going to map to whatever this is down here that we're actually shipping. And so we're kind of bound up of saying the same value is linked two different places. And because of that, we've got two different digests, two different descriptors. One is effectively scratch or nil or null or whatever you want to call it. And the other is the actual data. This we have to open up the chat because nobody's saying anything. So that means there's probably a bunch of chat going on. People, nope, not a word.
Hi.
Hi, John.
So why are they the same? What
So,
artifact type? The artifact type of this manifest is Cyclone DX plus XML, right? We could resolve the confusion around this by just not setting the artifact type to application / Cyclone DX plus XML, right? Is that something people want to do? Is have a single layer that is the same media type as the artifact type?
where are you going to make them? What's your path of making them different? Where are you looking to go with that?
I mean, so like if the problem is that this pattern doesn't work because the semantics are wrong, could we fix that? Like, do we want people to be able to filter by artifact type, where artifact type is exactly the single layers media type? That's why these are the same.
So if I'm uploading an artifact that is an XML Cyclone DX, I want end users to be able to say, give me the Cyclone DX XML artifacts. And they're going to look for that artifact type, I believe.
And this being a scratch descriptor or a scratch config solves what problem?
So we need, at least for some registries, a double curly in there. It needs to be in JSON format for some registries because they're parsing that config and they get mad at us if we don't. We can't make it 0 bytes because their registries don't like that either. And if I start throwing XML in here, I feel like I'm going to break other registries for other reasons. I haven't tested it, but if I start throwing cat pictures of a GIF or something in there, who knows what I'm going to break.
Sure. Okay, yeah. I guess I would say that it seems to me that artifact type is not this. Like, the artifact type should be something else. And that thing is defined as I have a single layer with an application / cyclone DX plus XML media type. And then this problem goes away.
I'm not sure I follow where you're going with that.
So I guess the media type of the layer is correct here, I imagine, right?
Mhm.
But the artifact type isn't the same as the media type of the layer. So having clients filter by the media type of the layer artifact type seems not necessary. Like it's easier, I guess, but
So this down here though is not propagate up to the artifact type.
right.
If someone's looking for this in the higher level refers API response, they don't see this one. They only see this one.
Right. But so I mean, you're writing a client, right, that is like looking for a specific thing, and someone is passing into that a cyclone DX plus XML media type. Where you get that seems out of band, right? So can we supply a different media type than cyclone DX plus XML for filtering artifact type? And can that media type be correct?
So correct is a relative term.
Sure.
So what are you thinking of changing this to?
I'm kind of inclined to agree with John here. I think applications like Cyclone DX would have been the artifact type that I chose. The encoding of the fact that it's XML would be the layer media type, or something else that is tool specific. I mean, this is guidance in the end of how they want to do it. So
Sure, but even if I change this for, say, Cyclone DX, and Cyclone DX has multiple kinds of formats. If we had a cat picture and it's a GIF, there's no JSON formatted GIF, I don't think.
Well,
someone will probably try it, but
I just call it cat picture. And
I mean, so like whoever is packaging this as an OCI artifact can choose an arbitrary string, and that arbitrary string can be communicated to clients. That is my understanding of how artifact type works. So I don't see, like, if it is a problem that the arbitrary string is wrong, as in, you know, is not saying it's JSON, where registries and clients expect JSON, then I think the people who are packaging this as an OCI artifact should choose a different arbitrary string that doesn't upset people. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know that, like, it is nice that these are the same, because like a single layered artifact, you know, I actually care about the single layered media type probably. And then I don't have to come up with an arbitrary string to represent this. But where, you know, cat's already out of the bag. Like you could do something really stupid, like plus JSON at the end of that, and satisfy someone probably. Or it could be like application / bnd.cyclonedx.artifact plus JSON, and it is defined as being empty, but with a single layer, you know.
how do you see your hand up?
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand. So Brandon, are you saying that we should have the media type the same as the layer type, or? Because I agree with John, and actually I had a conversation yesterday with 3V folks, right? And we were trying to figure out, for example, how can we say vulnerability report, which is Sarif vulnerability report, and link it to the image that this Sarif vulnerability report belongs to, right? And I was using like the IANA type for Sarif, but 3V folks said, well, tariff doesn't always mean a vulnerability report. We need to put something else in the artifact type. And they were asking, so what is the else thing that we're gonna put there, right? And filter by when we call the referrers API. And we said, we'll put, as John said, arbitrary string right now, because they would like to uniquely identify that. But then the next question came, and it's like, okay, so if we put something like VND 3V blah blah blah, can other scanner actually understand that, or does every scanner will put their own thing? Because our idea is that I generate the SARIF vulnerability report with 3V, and I can read it with, I don't know, Qualys or something else, right?
And I'm really
I just
trying to
kind of-
avoid, yeah, I'm trying to avoid exactly that. That's the problem I really want to solve is I'd like to be able to push whatever this report is and not care about what client pushed it, because all I care about is what the data was.
Yeah, I actually, we had about an hour discussion yesterday with Trivia about that thing, how we're gonna solve it. And I have a bunch of comments on the referrers API, but I don't want to derail the conversation right now. Okay, just wanted to share that kind of discussion.
The phrasing that I was trying to use was to say, whenever we saw this 441, the scratch descriptor, whenever you saw that digest in there, you just assumed this was a null, that this media type is pointing to a null here. It doesn't really point to actual data. And so it's not referencing whatever this data is because it's pointing to a null at that point. Aaron, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think that I would really like for the spec to keep descriptor intact as describing its content. So in this case, I would say, like, I would consider the example on the screen here as a implementations should not do this because the scratch data is not Cyclone DX plus XML. That implementation should determine a media type for their config blob that's appropriate for them, but is also valid, uses valid content.
So following that, if it's just me doing it myself, so if I were pushing artifacts myself, I'm just going to say it's Reg client pushing it separate from Crane, separate from Trivy, separate from everybody else. And then each of us has our own JSON out there.
I would say not.
That-
I would say that the sort of the it would be up to, I think, the SBOM people to come together to decide on what they want as their, whether that's Cyclone DX on their own or Cyclone DX plus SPDX. You know, whatever consortium exists, they are free to decide on what their chosen artifact type is. But if Cyclone DX chose to go their own way, they could choose application VND.Cyclone DX artifact, and that would be their. It would not be, I think, the client that would determine the config. It would be the type of the artifact. The artifact, whatever the artifact spec is, and we're not dictating what those artifact specs are.
So the thing that's upsetting everybody else is that I had the plus XML. And if I just take that out, that makes people happy.
I wouldn't say I'm happy, but I think that's an improvement.
Yeah.
I have a terrible idea. That might be good. What if we registered a structured suffix with IANA that's like plus OCI, and we can define what that means in some way? Like, could we come up with a definition of the plus OCI suffix that means, like, hey, This is JSON, and often it is an empty JSON object, and it means that look elsewhere in this wrapping document for content that is XYZ media type. You know, like that seems nuts to me, but also maybe solves this problem in a way that we don't have to just coordinate between 100 people.
John, I want to give credit to Vincent also, because he had suggested putting an example media type or something that we actually register for these documents. So it's not unreasonable. But are you suggesting we use that for these artifacts?
Yeah, so I don't know that I get the use case of like, I want the artifact type to be this single blob's media type, but that presumably that's useful. What I'm suggesting, Brandon, is plus XML plus OCI. But if our problem is that the descriptor is wrong when you do this, you know, this is not something I would do, but if people want to do this and the descriptor is wrong when you do this, then we could make it correct by defining this OCI structured suffix and you know, defining it to be whatever you want, such that the things people want to do are no longer incorrect. But yeah, I miss Vincent's suggestion here. But yeah, this seems fine. I think maybe it's gross. I don't know. People hate this.
No, it defines that this thing is a wrapper for that specific layer in some way. If we had the media type, we would have done that, right? But the media type is already reserved for the manifest. I mean, I don't see a problem here. Again, this is something that sticks in the manifest. No client is going to see it, but the search and filters would use this, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. I don't know if every artifact type would use this, or if only ones that aren't JSON would want to use this. You know, we're kind of like finding the seams between implementation behavior. So maybe it just makes sense for everything to be plus OCI so that it's simpler and you can just concatenate that.
Yeah, I think we can probably think of two sort of categories of artifacts here. So there's like the Helm chart or Singularity, or maybe more complex artifact that might be multiple layers, might be as complex as an OCI image in terms of, you know, there's some sort of structure to those layers, and maybe they have their own config format even. And for those examples, I think this first, this having like your own vnd.example.config JSON, that makes sense. For single file append to a, you know, we're essentially appending a single file or blob to a existing image or artifact by refers API. I think having some sort of example for that use case and calling out, I think having like a plus OCI or we have, would we have the ability to register with IANA a prefix so that we could say vnd.oci.artifact.x, you know, or something to embed, I guess, the existing media type. Maybe that plus OCI is the right way to do it, but
I think it is, yeah.
Okay. Then, I think this makes sense because if I use the refers API on whatever this, I guess I don't see a subject here, but whatever this refers to is referring to, I'll see application CycloneDX plus XML in the response to the refers API. So I'll be able to know, this is something I can handle. And for these single file appends, I like that use case.
So I do want to point out when we're talking about how JSON might be the easier solution, that's not hard if this was a CycloneDX JSON. This digest up here, even though it's JSON content, wasn't your CycloneDX JSON. It was just the nil config for it.
It could be.
Could be. So you're saying make the layer itself empty and put the CycloneDX up here, the data itself up here.
Not
Yeah.
That config blob is stored in very, very weird ways.
Yeah, I don't want to go down that path because it sort of creates two universes of artifacts, ones that put their data in layers and ones that put them in config. And this image manifest as artifact spec is complex enough as it is.
I don't have a strong opinion about it. That's fine with me.
So are people with a strong opinion that you really do want to have that plus OCI in there? Or because I mean, for myself, when it's coming out the other end, I'm just searching on artifact type. And I know that I'm looking at artifact type, which means this is an artifact, which means my actual content of the artifact is going to be in the layer, and that's where I can find it. It doesn't bother me that this doesn't match.
I think that
that-
the nice thing of this potential solution is that we have a really straightforward prescribed way to wrap a single file or a single layer that doesn't require everyone to come up with their own unique arbitrary string. It's just, if this is one document, just append plus OCI, and that's your media type, instead of everybody comes up with their own, like, often incorrect media type for their artifact.
But then comparing it to the original where they were the same, this doesn't bother me. I know it bothers other people. So
It bothers me. It bothers me about 10%, but it does bother me.
It bothers me to the extent that it opens a door to descriptors not describing their content that will not be able to close again.
Oh, wait a minute. If people are worried about a plus OCA and they've seen past the fact that the media type is an image, I think we've already we've made good progress. It's just
Yeah. I like the plus OCI approach, and I think that should be a prescriptive example in the PR or a subsequent PR.
do we need to register it with IANA first, or we just want to dictate it?
I think it would be interesting to try to register. I think I'm too mentally ill to do something that frustrating and boring, but I'm happy to suggest it and have someone else do the legwork.
Aren't you at an OCI meeting right now?
Only because you're here.
Oh, thanks.
What are we talking about proposing to IANA?
Plus
New
OCI.
structured suffix. I will link you to the registry if you'd like.
So this would, to recap, this would allow single blob authors who know what the media type of the blob is that they're pushing to have a prescribed config media type where it's just a trivial change to the media type they're pushing as the blob that is also not incorrect for the config descriptor. The plus OCI will indicate that it has to be a valid, I guess in this case, JSON object. I think that would probably be the limit of what we prescribe, right?
Do we have to limit it to just one blob at that point?
I think that would be the suggestion.
Yeah, otherwise, I'm not sure what it means.
I suppose you could, as long as all of the layers are the same media type, that would make sense to me as well. Application JPEG plus OCI, and then just a list of JPEGs in the layers. I don't know.
Okay, that one can be plus OCIs.
So thinking about how that's going to carry forward, at some point we might have a separate artifact manifest out there. It will have its own artifact type. And we want that to carry forward and have the plus OCI over there as well.
I think so. That string should not be changed, right? Over course, like you would expect it to be. The manifest is just a wrapper.
Yeah.
I don't want to throw too large of a wrench in this, but once we register plus OCI, that's also a fairly binding thing with IANA. So would we want something other than plus OCI? Would we want like plus OCI artifact or something like that, just to not tie up the OCI term?
I think we could define it in such a way that we can update it, where the definition depends on the context, but I want it to be short.
And that's what I was asking. Do you want it to be only for one layer or multiple? Because if you have, let's say, multiple YAML files or multiple JSON files, where do you see that going?
That could be invalid, or we could define it as like the first layer. Whatever people think is reasonable.
Given the context of the referrers API, I think as long as all of the layers match that format, then it makes sense to me. Like if I'm searching, I could search via referrers API using the query parameter for this CycloneDX plus XML plus OCI, and I will get back a list of manifests that contain ideally only layers containing that blob type.
That seems reasonable. I mean, I think as long as the manifest contains any layers with the wrapped media type, this is useful to clients. It may be that the manifest contains supplementary layers with different media types, but those are not the primary purpose of this artifact. So I would be fine with defining it such that the layers contains at least one descriptor with the media type truncate plus OCI off the end.
All right. So with that being said, the next steps for me on this one, I need to update this with the plus OCI, and do we want to do that in advance of registering it with IANA? Just get out there and get this thing merged, and we can eventually do the IANA stuff in the future.
That seems fine with me.
Why is this something that we need to care about at all? Like, why is an artifact type just up to people who want to use it? To make John as mad as they want. Like what? Like why is this something that we have an opinion on?
I also think this is a reasonable solution. So I agree with Michael.
I mean, the case for me was that we were trying to document guidance for people that wanted to do this in OCI. We weren't saying you had to do it this way. We were trying to give them some kind of guidance so that there was some kind of semblance of conformity between different people producing the same content. So if you have a Trivy, you have an Anchor, you have all these other tools out there all producing whatever their scan format was, that they could push it up to the registry and all the clients need to consume it could all consume the same thing without having to say, I need to consume the Trivy version of this, or I need to consume, pick each scanner you got out there. They don't have to specify each scanner that they want to consume from. They can just say, I just want to consume the vulnerability scan. I just want to consume the SBOM. And I know how to parse the CycloneDX JSON file.
And so that means they need like what? So then they have like application/SBOM or application/vulnerability results. Why do they need a plus OCI suffix?
I don't think they do. But this is where I am conceding to make John happy.
I think this is an edge case.
John said he agreed with me.
That's not me. That's not for me. No. That's to make me slightly less upset. But yeah, I agree with Aaron. I think this was Aaron's point. It's the descriptor is wrong if we tell people to do this and the content does not match the media type. And I think descriptor is way more important than OCI artifacts in terms of definitions.
So if they
instance-
instead of like plus XML plus OCI, if they just wanted to do like application plus SBOM plus OCI, that would be the suffix would help with. Is saying this is not.
If they're in control of the definition of application / SBOM, I don't think plus OCI is necessary unless application / SBOM has already been defined and it is not like a JSON document in some way.
I see.
I think
Well
this is
said.
only useful when you have an existing media type that like isn't valid JSON and you want to wrap it as an artifact in a predictable way. This kind of short circuits the like distributed registry of infinity arbitrary strings for wrapping one file, which I imagine is a fairly common use case.
Thank you. I'm fine with this. I'm sorry for joining 20 minutes late and then asking a bunch of questions you probably already talked about.
No, you're fine. Now you'll have a prescribed way to upload your cat gifs. That's what we really wanted to do.
Yeah, that's what we all want to do. And
But what I'm going to add to that one is that the only time we're doing this when we had the Scratch Digest. And every time we have a Scratch Digest, the content of that Scratch Digest does not match the media type of that descriptor. Every single time.
Well, I think this allows us to do that, right? We'll define the plus OCI as a JSON object. And so we can actually keep descriptor intact. We don't need to have any special language there.
Yeah, I'll point out that I'm very happy with this because this implements in a very gross and roundabout way my suggestion that we make descriptor something you can push to a registry, and we've kind of achieved this, but not quite. Like, I would love it if you could just put a descriptor as a manifest and have a way to unwrap that descriptor, but I think that ship has sailed.
No, we'll get there, John. I don't want to give up on that yet.
Okay, I do think that's the cleaner form of this.
Yeah, we will get there.
All right. So that gives me one more thing to change to making this. If I make that change, are there folks that are comfortable if I put the plus OCI in there, comfortable saying that they want to take that PR in whole, or do I need to split that PR up for people?
Will you have two examples, one with the plus OCI and one without?
I'll have 3 examples, one without, and then 2 with. I'm seeing some nods, so I'm assuming that I'll keep this all in one PR, even though it's got a couple little small cleanups in there in addition. All right. Aaron, did you want to talk about 1030, or is that something separate?
No, this is the clarifying, share the right screen here. Yes. This is clarifying the use of image manifest and image spec in general for use of artifact. And in particular, clarifying a lot of the must be ignored language. So I would love a review on this to make sure I'm changing the ignored to must not generate an error in all the right places. And I think the other key change here is sort of opening the door to, if in the future OCI wants to adopt a new manifest type, that there were some questions about, will registry support me pushing a new manifest type. And so this sort of clarifies that registry implementations, which just are involved in storing and copying content, should accept unknown manifest types. They might have no semantics, right? They're not going to parse it. They're not going to implement subject and refers and things like that on a arbitrary blob, but they will accept it.
That's the case I think you'll see people not agreeing on. Just because registries parse the manifest and they're parsing for the blobs in that manifest, they're doing garbage collection based on that. And so if they see an unknown manifest, pretty much every registry out there today rejects it, which means there are no OCI compatible registries.
I agree with the sentiment of this PR. I don't know that the details are right, but I do think we need to talk soon about how can we make it such that arbitrary manifests are supported.
Yeah.
But I have not read your PR yet, but I think that what you want is something I also want.
Yeah. I want to figure out a way to get out of the logjam of adding new manifest types. And if we cannot prescribe that as of some OCI spec that new manifest, like unknown manifest types must be accepted, then we're always going to end up in this sort of argument about backwards and forwards compatibility. We'll just never be able to resolve that because no new manifest type exists in OCI 1.0, right? And so OCI 1.0 registries will reject it.
I think there's still a path forward on the logjam on this one. So I'm still holding out hope there. And I'm holding out hope that the next manifest we add adds enough features that we don't need to worry about saying any manifest because the new manifest just solves so many issues.
Yeah. I guess the question there is, that doesn't really address the charter and the backwards compatibility point being raised, right? And so we need to adopt language somewhere that ensures a path to forward, new types, because otherwise someone can always in the future, and it might not even be any of the people in this call, some future maintainer could say, well, I read the charter and it says we have to be backwards compatible. And that means this to me. And this new manifest is not that. And so that always just escalates up to the TOB. That's not a great path, I think.
I definitely agree that we should strive for backward compatibility when it's feasible. And so I feel like we've done that for the artifacts right now, but I still think there's a way we can add new stuff into here as we go forward.
My take on this is that the current extensibility mechanisms in OCI 1.0 don't allow us to do things like add a new manifest, which sucks. It would be cool to have a breaking change that unlocks more extensibility mechanisms in some way. I imagine that's like a 2.0, but I want this. It shouldn't break everyone if we add a new manifest type. There needs to be a way to write a client or a server such that you can add a new manifest type and they continue to work. So we don't have any mechanism like that.
You can, John. I mean, there was one pull request we can probably revert that modified it so you can't have an additional media type. You can only have one image media type. That commit probably needs to be reverted. But originally we allowed for, matter of fact, it was a requirement to allow for additional media types, including additional manifest types. So we just need to revert what we've done, I think.
Yeah, but that doesn't solve like the practical matter of what people do currently with registries and clients and expectations of features. So like,
True.
I can't write a registry implementation that does garbage collection if I don't know the structure of the documents.
Right. I'm just saying, as far as backwards compatibility goes, a new API or a new manifest doesn't break the old solutions, right? The old APIs, the old applications. They don't use the new API. And a new client that's using a new API, well, he's on his own from that perspective, because that would have been a 2.0 API or a 1.3 or whatever it's going to be. Just saying.
I think as part of this PR, so I'm not prescribing any sort of fallback method or even just describing like what a new manifest type would be. Although if I were to think in the hypothetical of I am creating a foobar manifest and it references maybe some blobs and manifests in that spec and you want to do garbage collection on that, I think the fallback for that sort of approach would be they would have to add image or image index manifests, right, and push them to the, you know, sort of like we're doing with referrers, right? They would have to have a fallback that essentially registers those blobs and manifests to be discoverable via garbage collection, right? And but I don't want to necessarily get into the nitty-gritty details of prescribing something that we don't know is going to happen yet. But I do want to enable optionality in the future, and I think that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm also trying to make sure that tools like ORAS CP and others that like copy or you know proxies that proxy content, for example. I think it's a really important use case is if I have a registry mirror, I really do not want that registry mirror to be holding me back on, oh, it only supports image manifests and it does really gross things when those image manifests maybe contain cat GIFs or something. Like they should be transparent and not doing detection on the content.
I mean, yeah, there's a difference between like detection on the layer content and detection of the structure of the manifest, right? Like I can't write a mirror or I can't write a mirroring tool that mirrors things if I can't parse the manifest to know what content it references. But yeah, like mirrors should not fall over because the layers have a different media type than they expected, certainly. Maybe I misunderstood what you're saying, but I think we're on the same page. Like I think I want all the things you want. It's just like, how do we do that in a way that people can adopt and we don't have to do this every year.
Yeah. I think it would be helpful, maybe we're at the end of the call for review comments on this PR before the next call. If anyone has, you know, opinions about this, especially on, yeah, this line here, I think is potentially contentious and we could probably consider this PR with or without it. But I would love review comments on how could we articulate a future in which we can add new manifests, but without having to prescribe significant amount of detail about how to do so, right? Like leave that to OCI 1.3 or 2.0's maintainers to determine what that new manifest looks like, but break the logjam for them now.
Last one I had out there with like 1 minute left was 391, and that was just adding another header in there. So if people like that, we can go with that. Otherwise, Mike, I think I saw you had some comments in there.
Yeah, I've got some comments on that. I mean, basically the problem is you chunked it up, right? And what are you going to do with the remainder at the end? Are we going to require that the remainder be tacked on to the last chunk so that it still meets the minimum? Or are we going to not support the minimum for the last chunk? And either way, I think it's a must thing. Otherwise, it's going to be confusing.
Yeah, the latter. So it is a should that you should send all the chunks at least that min size, except for the last one, and the last one can be smaller.
So that's sort of indicating that it's not just the minimum, it's the maximum, and we want you to chunk it by that size. That's what it sounds like.
And for me, it's just making sure that every chunk is at least that size.
At least
except for the last one. Except for the last one.
But why except for it? That's the part that I'm not following. If there was a problem in storage of not supporting any chunk of less than that size, which I think was the original problem, then we haven't really solved it. Or are they going to, in the registry, tack on the last chunk?
It's on the server side. When the server receives that last chunk, it's able to push that last one in a smaller size. It just can't push intermediate ones.
It's a problem in transport, not in storage.
I think it's an S3 issue specifically. And so it's on the S3 backend, they have that mandate where the intermediate chunks until you get to the last one They have to be at least a certain size.
Well, is it,
5 megabytes.
is the transport issue accepting the last one to be minimum, be less than the minimum, or do we have to buffer
Yes.
it?
We don't have to buffer it.
Okay.
It can be smaller. That's the unit test that's in there right now actually forced that test on them so that they would check it and they approved it.
Okay. So we can add an additional sentence to talk about that last chunk. Must be supported. A little must.
That was everything in here is a should, and that was where that last one I said except for the final
last
chunk.
one. And it doesn't say what the rule is for the last one. That's all.
There is no rule. It can be smaller. You can do whatever you want with that last one.
I think that's must language. Yeah. It must be allowed to be smaller or tacked on to the end. I'm just saying.
Yeah, okay.
Otherwise, on the client side, we're like, what am I supposed to do with this? You said I couldn't.
Well, everything in there was intentionally a should so that I didn't force anything because I figured some clients are going to try to do it. And it's just like, well, if you ignore the header, then you ignore the header and you're going to get an error message back from the server. That's just what's going to happen to you. But for the other ones, I left it as a should just so the clients would know that, hey, they should at least try to do this. But the last one they don't have to worry about, and that falls back to the existing definition where there is no requirement.
I'll make the suggested change. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Sorry for running long.
Cheers.